Finally, now it's time to create our first class. So I am going to create a new file here, customer.py. Do not forget .py, otherwise VS Code does not recognize it as a Python code. This is going to be our customer class definition. Okay, the way we do it, we just define class and we give it the name. There you go. We just created a class. We just started creating our class. The first thing that we usually do inside the class is adding a method that is called the constructor. This constructor method is responsible, it gets run as soon as we create an object from this class. And what we usually do inside this method, we assign values to our attributes, or what we call it, our data, like the ID number, first name, last name, address, the list of purchases, all those things, phone number, all the attributes that we have for this class. And we are following the design from that UML that I showed you in the previous video. So let's just start with defining our constructor. So this is how you do it. Double underscore that. Okay, so this is what we call a constructor. So I'm just going to copy some comments here. Okay, so this is a constructor. This is a method that Python runs when we create an object from this class. We can do whatever we want inside this class, but usually the first thing that we want to do is just assign some values to our attributes or data as soon as an object from this class is made. Obviously, that's the first thing we want to do. We want to assign some values to our attributes. Where do we get those values? We usually get those values through parameters for this constructor, and we're going to use them to initialize our attributes with. So I'll explain in a bit what this self means, but I'm just going to define a bunch of parameters again, and this is the expected type of value for these parameters. And this one is supposed to be a string. This is supposed to be a string. I can move to the next line if I want to. I'm just going to do it so you can see that this is something you can do. And here it is. We also need to specify the expected return type. None means this function is not going to return anything. Okay. And then what we do with these parameters, we're going to use them to initialize all the attributes for this class. The way we have access to everything provided in this class is through this parameter self. So from now on, every method that we create or add inside this class should start with this parameter self. So I'm just going to add more comments here to explain what's going on with the self. So we must add the self as the first parameter to all the methods from now on. This refers to whatever an object from this class can have access to inside this class. So if I want to get access to the ID number inside this class as an attribute, I need to mention this, and then I add my first attribute right there here. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to assign this parameter to it. So this is going to be the value that we get through this parameter as soon as we create an object from this class. Once we create an object from this class, it will make more sense. But for now, let's just do that for all attributes. So first name, This is basically where I'm defining the attributes for the first time. So first name, we're going to assign it to this attribute. Self. Last name, I just defined the last name attribute for the first time. We're going to assign that to the last name. Address, this is where I define address attribute for the first time, and I assign this address parameter to it. Same thing I'm going to do for the phone number, and I'm going to assign this phone number to it. Same thing for, I'm also going to create purchases attribute, which is supposed to hold a list of all the purchases. But for now, I don't have any purchases. I'm just going to initialize it with an empty list right there. Okay. So every time you also define a method, you kind of want to add some comments to document it. So when we call these methods later on and we create object from this class, we can actually look at the documentation to get some information about like what are these parameters, what type they are, and everything. So the way we add documentation for each method is that right after the method header, inside the method, we use triple quotations, and then we start documenting with explaining the purpose of the method. So this is a constructor, and what we're doing, we initialize the attributes when an object is created, and then you do need to use these key parameters. And right after that, you kind of need to explain all the parameters and the expected type and some explanation for it exactly in this format. So now we kind of added documentation for this method. Later on, I'll show you how we can have access to this documentation for this constructor, so we learn about the parameters and what values we should use when we create an object from this class. Okay, so we're done with the constructor. Again, this is going to be the method that gets run as soon as we create an object from this class. And this is how we define the attributes for the first time using self parameter, and inside the constructor, whatever variable, whatever attribute you define, it's going to be considered as an attribute for this class. All right, so now we have all the attributes. Let's just add methods, more methods. Now we want to add actions here. Okay, so probably the first method that I also added to my UML was add item. Again, do not forget this self. This self allows us to have access to everything that this class provides for us. So this is going to be our item ID and the quantity, which the expected type should be an integer, and this function or method is supposed to return either true or false. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to make sure the quantity is actually a positive value. If it is, if it's not, actually I'm just going to return false immediately. And based on what's my quantity, so I am going to repeat adding the same item to list of my purchases. So this purchases, remember it was a list, I defined it right here. So from this class I am going to add item ID, and I'm just going to item ID, and I'm just going to repeat it based on how many quantities I have for this item. And when I'm done, I'm just going to return true. That means everything went well. Okay, so we just defined one method. I'm going to save it. And again, we need some documentations for it, so I'm just going to copy it from somewhere else so I don't have to type it. And right there inside the function, using triple quotations, we add our documentation. So this is some explanation about what this function does, what this method does. We use parameters keyword to add and explain all the parameters. If the method is supposed to return something, we use returns key to explain what type and what exactly that value is. So we're going to return true if something was added successfully, and false if we got wrong quantity. Probably we can write more codes. For example, if this item ID does not exist, we can also return false. We can do a lot of things, but I'm just going to keep things simple. Okay, let's also define the next method. So this is the method that actually removes item from the cart. Okay, all right. So what I want to do here is that make sure the item is already in my purchase list. If it is, so I'm just going to go ahead and just remove that from the list of my purchases, and I'm just going to return true. That means we were able to remove it successfully. Otherwise, if I cannot find it over there, so I'm just going to return false. Because it does not exist. So I'm also going to add some documentation to this. Some explanation, remove an item from customers' purchases. I'm using parameters keyword to explain all the parameters, and the returns keyword to explain the return type and what is going to be returned. Okay, so far so good. Let's get to our next function, which is going to be is cart empty. Don't forget the self. And this guy is supposed to return a Boolean value, either true or false. So if there is something inside the list of purchases, I'm going to return true. That means that I have something in my cart that I want to buy. If it's empty, I'm just going to return false. So I'm just going to return, I'm just going to check the length of my purchases, and if it's true, if it's 0, that means it's empty. I'm going to return true because the list is empty. But if the length is not 0, this condition returns false. That means the list is not empty. Okay, let me also add some documentations to this. Perfect. Now let's get to our next function, show price. I think we had something else. Display card was the next one, I think. Self, and this one is not supposed to return anything. Basically, it just goes through the list of all purchases and it just prints them. So let's just make sure the list is not empty. So I already have a method that tells me if it's empty. So I'm just going to call that. Again, look at that. I'm using self so I can have access to everything that is available inside this class. So if this is true, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to print, going to format this. going to mention the first name and say this person's card is empty. If it's not empty, I'm going to format my output. I'm going to mention the first name and then say this person's card is holding, and then I am going through the list of all items in my purchases list, and I'm going to join all of them with comma in one place right after mentioning the name of that person's card right there. So yeah, if it's empty, I'm just going to say it's empty. If it's not, we're going to list everything and we're going to mention the name of that person at the beginning. Okay. Let me also add some comments here. I don't have any parameters nor any return type, so that's why I'm not using parameters or returns keyword to explain anything. So that should be obvious. Okay, let's define another method. Show price self, and this one is supposed to return a price, so we're going to return that as an integer value. For each item, I guess I'm just gonna pick some price for it. So based on how many elements I have in my purchase list, I'm just gonna multiply it by 10. Just some default value. We can do better for sure here. We can also add the extra attribute for the price of each item and everything. But again, just to keep things simple, I'm just going to use some default value for every item that we have inside our list. Okay, so let me also add some documentation here. So I'm just going to explain for each item. We're just going to assume the cost is 10 units for simplicity. All right, we're done with this. And let's buy everything now, everything that we have inside the cart. Okay, so what I'm gonna do for the buy, if I do have something in my cart, I'm just going to show a message that I just bought them, and I just going to empty the list of my purchases. But if the list of my purchases is empty, I'm just going to return false because there's nothing for me to buy. So there we go. When I get here, that means I do have something in my cart. So I'm going to show a nice message. This person bought, and I'm just going to list all the items. Self purchases. Okay, so I'm just going to print all the items, and then I am going to empty my cart. I'm just going to clear up my list, empty the cart after purchase, and I'm going to return true. That means everything went well. And let me also add some comments here, or documentations. Sorry, not there, right there. Okay, so what did we just do? We just defined a class, a blueprint. We started with defining a constructor. A constructor is a method that gets run every time we create an object. And what we usually do inside this constructor is that we initialize our attributes. We define and initialize our attributes here with the parameters that we get. We can do anything we want. We can print a message. We can do anything we want. But this is typically what we do inside the constructor. We initialize attributes, and then I also define a bunch of actions or methods here. Do not forget the self. This self things allows us to have access to everything that we define inside this class. So once we create an object from this class, this self refers to that specific object, that specific instance that was created from this class. So that's what's going on with the self. Self refers to a specific object that was created from this class. So that's why all these objects that we create from this blueprint are independent from each other. So every object has its own self. So now we have the class, and this is how we add documentation for each method and everything. So in the next video, I'm just going to show you how we can actually create object from this class and what happens when we run them.